Hey there and welcome to That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Tuesday, May 10th, 2022, and I'm one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson, and joining me, as always, is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
Hello.
How you doing today, Trev?
Doing all right. Hanging in there. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. Just watched Multiverse of Madness last night, as we talked about, and got to talk about Casino Royale yesterday, so it's been a good, fun time here this week. Yeah, this week works still. On That News You Care About, we are talking about neither one of those things, but we are talking about young, hip, cool things like the MTV of video games here, Trevor. There is a big, long piece over on Input Mag, and I do just want to give a shout out to being really confused when you first shared this in Slack, because all it just showed was Input, and I was like, did someone take our name and like run with it? And I was just really just psyched out for a second. And was like, did we talk about this 3 years ago? But over on Input Mag, they have a big long piece on the inside the colossal failure of VENN, the MTV of video games. Let me pull up the author. It is by
Tom Caswell.
Thank you. And yeah, I think this is a great shout out you kind of gave in Slack, and it is a really weird, fun, wild story, and also just a great long form piece, which is exactly the kind of thing we like to shout out and kind of go over on this story. There's a lot to unpack in this, Trevor, but I think where I kind of want to start it for right now is reading through this whole piece and thinking about just like VENN and the headline of like the MTV video games, all that kind of stuff. It didn't occur to me until probably like a quarter of the way into the piece where they were like, and then G4 came back and was like, oh, right, this was a thing that had already been done for like 10 years. We had the MTV video games. It was G4. And yeah, we're like realizing that like, man, that really must have sucked. And despite all of their like assurances to the contrary, it definitely changed what VENN might otherwise have kind of had. Trevor, kind of what are your initial impressions of the excellent piece on kind of the collapse and fall of VENN?
Yeah, I was curious when VENN was getting announced. I remember like seeing those stories kind of come through and like looking at it and being like, so they're trying to do like a G4ification, but do it like on Twitch. And then they were like, but we're going to be on Roku devices and we're going to be on all these other, it's like, we're going to get TV deals. It's like, but like that didn't work. We've already seen there's historical proof that didn't work. Why would you think that would work now when even fewer people engaged in these kinds of things are watching TV on those devices? Like what, like at the time it was like, there's no strategic rationale there apart from, oh, they're from like NBC or and had like done TV deals, and so they thought, no, we can bring it back, we can make it work this time. It was like, no, you like, and they jumped the gun and kind of like announced this when there had been murmurings of G4, but like this was before G4 kind of officially announced it was coming back and stuff like that. And so like when G4 got announced too and like pointed out that it was going to be doing a lot of the same kind of stuff, I was like, well, like, but why though? Like you remember that it did like fold, right? And there were reasons for that. And like I think G4 to like what we've seen seems to be like living well within its means, relatedly, versus these guys just were spending money left and right, to try and like, but like they were spending money left and right, but not in any way to build an audience. They like the article touches on the idea that like they were just expecting that the influencers that they were hiring on would bring, a massive audience with them. And I will say the one or two times I checked out VENN, it was because I had followed one of their hosts, Emma Fife, from stuff she had done in the past in the movie trivia Schmodown space. Sorry. So like I followed her and I was like, oh, it's cool that she got this like hosting gig, and yeah, let me check out this thing. And I watched it and it was like, okay, it's like Kind of Funny Games Daily, but with like way more money being pumped into it, that doesn't change the like very nature of the product though, and it works for the level of Kind of Funny because they started out doing that as like a couple people in a bedroom, in a spare bedroom, and and it continues to work because they're still doing it, you know, within a small space and studio space that they use for many other things. And so like even just like what the few times I watched VENN, I was like, this doesn't understand Twitch in that like they're pouring way too much money into this, but that's not what a Twitch audience is looking for.
Right.
And that's very much what like a lot of this article kind of goes into and talks about. And so I was like, well, yay, vindication, pat on the back for me. I think it does touch on the ideas though that like a lot of the issues they've faced, G4 is also and will continue to also face, because the audience is just very different for this kind of content, and it's very questionable the revenue generator that something like that can be right now, in the, you know, wider space of kind of video game content on Twitch or on YouTube or wherever they're putting stuff. And I got to imagine anything they're putting like out there on actual TV is getting like incredibly low ratings, like very small numbers of actual viewers, because again, I just don't anticipate the audience is there. That's like, they're trying to suggest that the audience is out there for it, but I don't know if there's anything that really backs that up.
I think those are all fantastic points. And I'm just going to agree with you on all that right out of the gate. I think for me too, another element of this is there are a lot of advantages that G4 has to VENN just in a vacuum.
Yeah.
But obviously G4 doesn't exist in a vacuum, and neither does VENN. And out of the vacuum, the fact that G4 has this, you know, 2-decade-old legacy, right? And people feel nostalgic, right? They grew up with it. They care about that. So when it comes back, they are excited about this thing that they maybe otherwise wouldn't be. And we kind of get a really interesting, like, trial case of the scenario, right? Of like one thing that you have no personal attachment for that's doing very similar things, and one that you do, even tangentially, right? Like even me and you, who are neither one of us are like the biggest G4 fans when we like were growing up kind of in the early 2000s in the video game space. I probably watched a little bit more than you did, but still not a ton.
I mean, I barely ever, like, the most I would have watched was the one summer I had access to it, and even there I was watching a lot of Extreme Warrior, American Ninja Warrior stuff,
right? Yeah, absolutely.
And those kinds.
That's
of
what I would watch. It
was like the two channels I was watching, but even that was like I was also spending a lot of time just working on like theater construction stuff, because that was the job I had at the time. So it like, yeah, I have very, very little. Like I probably watched, you know, maybe a dozen Attack of the Show episodes, and that's it.
Yeah.
Like Kevin Pereira and Olivia Munn. Like I remember watching a few of those, and that's pretty much it. That's pretty much the extent of my G4 background. So much so that like when I started kind of covering stuff and people were like, oh my God, that's Adam Sessler at an event, I was like, I have no idea who that is. But
right.
Cool.
So like I knew the people, but like I didn't really consume their content either. But even I am like, if I'm gonna root for one of these, it's gonna be G4 to succeed. Even more so because like I think the pool of talent that G4 kind of pulled in, right, and getting like the Xavier Woods, right, and you know, all the different cool, awesome, diverse, fun people that some of whom we know personally that are doing things at G4, and then versus like I couldn't tell you anyone at VENN, even like who you said was like, yeah, like I know of her, I'm excited for her to have that opportunity. I can't tell you a single other person who works at VENN, right? And like it just feels like there's no sort of discourse or discussion around it in like good or bad ways. Like no one's even being like, it's so terrible, like just like no one's talking about it. And if no one's talking about it in our circles, I can't imagine in like the wider audience of people who like watch TV, it's gaining any sort of traction, right? And so I think that is a key flaw of it, right? And it is like the least like shocking thing to read that like one of the co-founders of VENN is a son of the guy who like helped found Babbage's and GameStop, and it's like, well, they're facing their own issues, right?
Yeah.
They're not necessarily, I think, having their ear to the ground of what the millennial and Gen Z audience want either. And so it's like that's just so perfectly in sync here. Like, I just think it is an example of people who don't understand the video game market in any real in-depth way, being like, we're just going to spend all the money to make our thing huge. And it's just like, that's not how it works. So especially on a platform like Twitch, where you said like the most popular Twitch moves are just like a dude in his bedroom or a woman in her bedroom or a couple of schmucks in like a guest bedroom of their shared apartment, right? Like that is sort of the brand and energy of Twitch in so many ways. And then like being a part of their journey to doing bigger and better things, right? But like if you just start off trying to be like your NBC nightly news with Brian Williams, people don't feel any sort of connection to that, right? Or any connection to like you reaching that level. And I think if they had brought on like anyone with like that knowledge of Twitch, they would have been able to pretty quickly diagnose that problem, because it doesn't make it that hard of one to pick up on.
Yeah, that was one of the points brought up in the article, is this idea that somebody kind of came into one of the Twitch chats at one point and made like an offhanded comment about how many of these people were actually real viewers, and they kind of mentioned that when management caught wind of this, there was a panic, and after an all-hands meeting, the viewership began to drop dramatically. Quote, "Our views went from 20,000 a show to like 100 people overnight," says one former employee. So like it almost seems that they were very much kind of like their marketing was paying Twitch bots or buying Twitch bots or something to like just drastically inflate their views so they could go out to like financiers and be like, hey, look at how many people were watching our stuff. I talked with Cameron about this recently. Like all of the stuff that happened in the last 10 years around like Facebook and basically everybody shifting to video because the Facebook metrics said that that's where the money is and that's where the views are and stuff. And then all that just ending up to be bullshit has just led me to not trust any platform, like especially any platform that counts like autoplay views. So your TikTok, your Twitch, your like Twitter views and stuff like that. Like none of that I buy, because so much of that can so easily be manipulated. That the idea that they kind of allude to in this, that like Kotaku had investigated in the past and stuff, is like you can just kind of open that browser on a window or have like bots with it open on a window to be inflating views, even if they're not actually there in the like on Twitch and in the chat and stuff like that. And it's like such an easy thing to do that it's like, yeah, I don't like, why would you actually rely on those numbers? There's no kind of like second auditing, around them. If they're high, then yeah, you're going to like praise them and stuff. But if anybody takes any kind of like second glance, it's like, yeah, but how many people are actually engaged in this, or how many of these views are actually real? I mean, we see all the time, like the Twitch hate raids and stuff. Like Twitch is so easily manipulated with regards to these kinds of things that, like, yeah, they clearly just didn't have an audience and were doing whatever they could to try and like fudge the numbers. And when they got called out for it, it shows so like drastically.
One of the things for me too is, and this is like, unfortunately more of a standard operating procedure for a lot of companies in the video game space, is just like the workplace culture too, right? Like when it gets into this section, right? And like just pulling like this entire chunk of like, despite its attempt to be the future of games media, they claim VENN was the most mismanaged company that any of them had ever worked at. Jumping out a little bit more. It's a business, they say, that failed to understand its product and audience, which is exactly what we said, with leadership that created a brutal work environment for employees. As one former worker wrote in an anonymous feedback form the company issued after a round of layoffs in late 2020, VENN is, quote, extremely wicked, shockingly evil, and vile, end quote. An evaluation invoking a judge's description of some of the murders committed by serial killer Ted Bundy. right? Like, and it just kind of goes on from there. These like huge excerpts. Under the one, VENN is in one word a nightmare, like a boys club, a top to bottom, a complete colossal failure, right? Like, again, I don't think shocking considering kind of people they have leading this thing who have no business running a business really. But then also I think one of the reasons that VENN fails is that unlike with the like rebrand of G4, it didn't pull in, I think, people who actively wanted to help try to foster a more like inclusive and diverse workspace where those would be like things that they praise and not just like trying to like bring in people who were promised one thing and then given like a completely separate like bag of goods, right? Like this to me reads way more of like was it Netflix recently that like had like the layoffs on like the Netflix side of things, like publishing side of things, where they'd like promise which people like to have like like the whole point is we're going to build out like an inclusive, diverse like platform of like creators and producers and writers, and then just like laid off that entire team after like 5 months or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's what VENN strikes me much more of is like that's what we're going to try to do, and then we're actually just going to not do that and just fire all of you, and like poorly run this, not like follow up on any sort of like harassment allegations, and like just foster like a boys club culture like it's Mad Men in 1960s.
Yeah, there's an interesting element. I'm trying to find it, but I'm not finding it on the fly. But like they talk about like that, like a diverse culture was clearly like an optics thing that they were keeping an eye on, because they talk about how like the on-air talent that they hired was from a diverse, cast, but then they like touch about, but like it ended there. Like behind the scenes, It was pretty much all, straight white men, kind of like running everything else. And it's like, so they knew that like when eyes are on, like that's what people are looking for kind of in this day and age, diversity in hiring. But they like that stops as soon as people can't see what you're doing. And that was like, I was like, well, unfortunately, like that's definitely something we see again. Also, far too often. Like so much of this, like I was kind of like highlighting some points initially of like these are the things that I find that are kind of like unique to this story. But like all of the crunch culture stuff, all of the misogyny and sexism that we see in so many of the other stories that like we've been covering and have seen covered in recent years. I mean, the fact that like you mentioned the co-founder from Babbage's and GameStop, the other co-founder having been like the head of esports and broadcasting at Riot Games, a company not unknown for its issues with legal and diversity and whatnot. Like so much of that is just business as usual, that like I just found myself continually not surprised that of course this company was also dealing with all of those other things that we see every other company deal with. The fact like they, like in addition to Riot Games' history, one of them, the Babbage's one, had previously worked in marketing at EA, and it's like, well, yeah, you probably like you probably just got that job because of who your dad is, and like there's such like insane nepotism,
right.
and like that, and that kind of fed throughout. There are multiple examples of like they hired people and those people ended up with like 6-figure salaries, and they're like they got the job because of who they know and not through like any
That's
kind of formalized vetting or stuff like that. And meanwhile, like the people they brought in as like the diversity hires or whatever were getting, especially the women, were drastically underpaid compared to their male producer counterparts and stuff like that. And it's just like, yeah, I'm glad they failed so miserably, but I imagine that they still walked away with like a bunch of since they got that money from funding resources and stuff. It's not that like they were putting their own money into these things.
So
they got 2 rounds of PPP loans, which we like. I know a story was going around today about like just how little oversight and how like fakakted that whole thing was. So of course they were able to also exploit, because they had the accountants and the connections to figure out
Who could do
exactly
that.
what they needed to do to try and secure some of those loans. That probably
Right,
didn't actually pay. They probably didn't actually pay employees. They probably helped pay for the $6,000 facility that that they
moved out of 9
kitted
months
out
later.
and then like fled down to Burbank for instead.
One of my favorite quotes in the entire piece is simply, quote, "We were pretending that we were going to be MTV, but we didn't realize the audience we wanted to talk to thought MTV was the stupidest thing ever created," end quote. Right? Like, I think that is such a perfect quote to describe this entire story, right? Like, they just didn't know what they were doing, and they didn't know what they wanted to, or I guess they knew what they wanted to be, but they didn't understand what the audience wanted in any way, right? Like, especially because even for me, right? And I'm 30 years old now, right? Like, I'm like the prime demo for like what they should be like aiming to hit kind of thing for a Twitch viewer. Like, even I came in at like the tail end of MTV being like remotely culturally relevant. By like the time I like was in junior high and high school, even MTV was less music videos and more just like shitty reality TV shows and the flavor of love, right? Like, it was more of that, right? And so, God forbid any Gen Z kids who never knew MTV being anything other than just like trashy reality TV shows and just being like not relevant at all. Like, so much of their audience just didn't even grow up with what MTV was. And so them keep pitching this thing as like the MTV video games either meant nothing to people who heard that or meant only a bad thing to them, right? And so I just think there was such a gross misunderstanding. Like, part of me wants to be like, how did this go forward? How did no one in the room say, this is a terrible idea, you shouldn't do this? And it's like, well, obviously it's because it's the perks of being a rich, straight, white guy, right? Like, you can just kind of do whatever you want and people are just going to largely agree with you. And even more so when everyone else in the room are friends that you hired, right? It's going to be pretty hard to get a lot of, dissenting opinions there. And that's something the piece goes into as well, right? Like, I just think so many bad decisions were made. Like, it is almost incredible at how they failed at almost every single thing on like so many levels. But failure comes from the top down in so many ways, and I think you see that so clearly here with what happened with VENN.
Yeah. It does raise the question, and to I guess their credit, the co-founders, like, I think at least one of them weighed in on the story and kind of like provided feedback or provided like comments to the reporters' questions and stuff. And they say like as we've kind of touched on, like, G4 has a lot of the same kind of issues. And will, like, the one thing G4 has going for it is its name recognition and that nostalgia pop. But how valuable is that in an era where our attention is already pulled in a billion different directions?
Right.
Like, what does that look like? How is G4 making money? Is G4 making money, or are they one of just the many companies that never really make money? They just keep getting like funded until they try and turn a profit, or try and show their developers and their investors that they can turn a profit. Like, what is that actually going to look like? I don't know what the current deals and that structure looks like, but it's and again, as you said, like, we have friends that like work there, and we know a lot of the kind of personalities and stuff on and off camera over there, and it's like, I hope nothing but the best for them, but it's also just a very questionable business model, and how what is the actual likelihood of it succeeding, and let alone like thriving, succeeding, let alone thriving, I guess. Like, what is that gonna look like?
Yeah, I mean, even going into, I don't know what G4's long-term future looks like, right? Like, I don't know what G4 would be in 2025, but I will say that, like, I'm much more interested by what G4 is doing now in 2021 and 2022 than I was a decade ago, right? Like, I think they at least have a better understanding of what Twitch is, even if the TV side of things still, I don't know how successful that's going to be long term, but like, I think the people they brought on as host and as kind of the creators for G4 content are in a lot of ways people who have been creating and building an audience of their own over the years, right? And like, yeah, like I look at Xavier Woods as one of the biggest examples of that, but also people like Danny, right? And I think also I mean, obviously the former G4 hosts who've just been continuing to build their audience in the interim like decade, right? And I think that, you know, they understand a bit more of what makes something successful on the internet, which is, I think, that personal connection to the host or the creator, whoever it might be, and seeing them grow together, right? If you grew up watching G4 and you continue to watch, like, Olivia Munn go crazy, or Adam Sessler just be kind of a weird guy on the internet for a decade while he kind of wandered around in the woods, right? Or, like, Megan or Morgan or, like, all these other people from, or even, like, Sarah Jean Underwood was on G4 for a little bit. And, like, all these people kind of keep building out their brand over a decade and then get into them now to kind of come back to the channel, or watching the new blood people who started from nothing. They didn't have a TV channel to kind of get popular off of. They just were people who were liked video games or liked movies or liked wrestling or whatever it was, and kind of built that brand and built that audience and built that kind of community. That to me is much more of a authentic way to grow and evolve as a brand, right? And like maybe G4 long term focuses more and more on like Twitch and those community side of things and less on the TV side of things. I don't know what the breakdown of G4's finances look like, obviously, in terms of like how much they get from, I'm sure, like ads on TV versus Twitch or whatever it might be. But even if they don't, even if they commit more to TV, maybe, like, I just think they're in a more stable place long term. I mean, obviously they're in a more stable place long term, but they're in a more, I think, potentially successful place because of the kind of authentic relationships between the like creators and their communities versus from what VENN kind of did.
Yeah, and the article does point out that G4 has the added backing of Comcast.
Also that, which is not bad to have.
Yeah, that certainly, like, those resources will certainly like help them. Yeah. Unless, there's, like, as we see just seemingly constantly these days, like a merger happens or something and there's just like organizational restructuring. Like I could very easily see like, oh, Comcast got a new head and is looking to clean house, and boom, G4 hits the cutting block, or the chopping block. Like that wouldn't surprise me at all. And I will say, like, obviously we've touched on a lot of like the like structural and organizational issues. I have every faith that like the people that we know that work for G4 would absolutely like speak out if they were encountering those issues. So I think G4 also likely has a better culture around it and isn't, dealing with a lot of the same issues that VENN was dealing with on that front. But it's still like, from the broadest comparison between the two of them is just like, is there actually a sustainable market for that kind of offering in the 2020s?
Yeah. And I don't know, but I think that at the end of the day, I have more faith in their ability. And I think partially because G4 has done this before actually gives them that little bit of like institutional memory, right? Like they sort of, I think, will understand some of what led to it eventually kind of folding up, a decade ago, right? And the trends from that have probably only accelerated, right? And I think they're aware of that. And I think, to keep it as kind of small as you can at the start and grow from there, and not just try to do a million things at once, which they go into. For VENN was very much the case. Like they just try to do everything and they did none of them really well. And I think try to start up small, build and grow from there, right? And yeah, I mean, like, it's very easy. One day Comcast just says, this isn't making us enough money, and then boom, we're done. But I still think that, G4 will be around in 3 or 4 years from now. What that looks like, I don't know, but I am way more interested in that than a revival of VENN, who hasn't posted anything in his social channels since last fall, right? Hasn't had a video on the YouTube channel since the summer, and who, if you go to their website, it's just a blocked error message, right? So it's like, that's not what we're aiming for here, I think, pretty clearly. And so they couldn't even end well. Even that was just like a backdoor quiet kind of like, we're just gonna stop existing. I don't know. Yeah. Any kind of final thoughts and wrap up on VENN here, Trev?
I mean, I wish that the people who led that place just to ruin and screwed over a lot of people's lives would deal some kind of comeuppance, but
right,
we've seen far too often that they won't. They'll some of them, like the article kind of goes into, have already landed cushy jobs thanks to some of those connections elsewhere, and it's like, well, fuck those guys.
Yeah, that to me is what I also wanted to highlight in my last kind of thoughts, and I'm glad we're on the same page of just obviously fuck those guys, but also more than that is there were people who sacrificed a year of their lives trying to make this work despite all of the insurmountable issues from the people above them, right? And who were explicitly promised a diverse and inclusive workspace, and then upon arrival it wasn't that at all. Who were promised, I think, greater creative freedoms and ideas, and then Freddie Wong's brother comes in as an executive producer and overruns everything, right? There, I think, were just so many people who, even if they were only there for a few months, it's still a few months that they weren't able to build up time at a better company or spending time growing or involving somewhere else, right? And it is just such a unfortunate reality before you even get to the then harassment allegations and just toxic workplace culture and crunch that just had such a negative draining effect on so many people unnecessarily.
Yeah, I just want to clarify on that Jimmy Wong had been there from early days. He was there, I believe, as a producer beforehand, but he was there as a host day one. But yeah, the story does go into this weird when management changed, he kind of ended up sort of stumbling into an EP role, but it was communicated very terribly, and it was just a weird, awkward
half the project to be done by another EP and half by him, and just what
yeah. But
again,
but he didn't I just wanted to highlight that he didn't just swoop in from out of nowhere.
No,
or because he was Freddie Wong's brother, he was there from kind of early days. Maybe some of that connection comes from his his work as with Freddie on Rocket Jump and stuff that, and they're kind of history in the YouTube space. But yeah, that was just another weird aspect to the story. In the same vein as people showed up to work one day and found out that the office had moved, and the executives being I don't know how they didn't know. I feel like we communicated that very well. It's well, maybe something was lost in communication from your level down to their level. And I can very easily see people not having been told that information. And so I think communication was clearly a giant issue at this company.
I think if people are saying, I don't know where we work, then I think it's pretty clear that you did, in fact, not communicate that well when multiple of your employees are not aware of where they're working any longer, or the fact that it is just a completely different location. But that is the story behind VENN. Go check out the great writing and reporting on it over on Input Mag. Trev, you've got a shout out this week. What are we shouting out?
Yeah, we talked about this probably a couple months back. Funomena had it was kind of included in one of those like exposés. I believe People Make Games, I think their YouTube channel had kind of done like a here's some issues. Like it was like a 3 studio thing. One of them had been Fulbright, the Gone Home studio. One of them was Funomena, and I don't remember who the other one was. But basically, it was like an expose saying like Robin Hunicke actually kind of sucks and is a terrible boss. And like a week after that story came out, Funomena basically like laid off their staff and kind of like started closing their doors because like funding hadn't come through. And this is an article from Imran Khan over at Fanbyte titled "The Hopeful Beginning and Abrupt Shuttering of Funomena." Kind of talks about the timeline of things and yeah, like in a similar boat, like they kind of like brought the staff together and said like, hey, we're working on funding still, but there were people who like didn't know if they still had jobs or if they were still working for Funomena, and even now like it's unclear if Funomena is still actually a company or if it's like what the actual status of the company is, because they've all kind of gone dark, but like obviously people have been let go and there is nobody like really actively working on things. But it was just another deeper dive look into just poor management, this in this case kind of like surprising a lot of people because Robin had such a presence in like the GDC and the PAX kind of communities, as somebody who was out there advocating for like mental health in the workspace and that kind of stuff. And turns out she was a sociopath who kind of on a Zoom call will berate an employer or an employee saying something to the effect of like, well, I guess they couldn't stick around because they have to go work on their marriage. And it's like, what the fuck is wrong with you that you think that is an appropriate thing to say at any time, let alone in a work meeting about one of your employees? Just a wild story in there, and just another example of some good reporting from Imran over there. So yeah, check that out.
Yeah, absolutely encourage everyone to go do that. Otherwise, that's going to be the show. Thank you for listening or watching. You can go over to the podcast service of your choice and like and subscribe to the feeds there. Rate and review us on iTunes. Give us some 5 stars. Tell us what you like about us. You can also go over to youtube.com and check out the video version of the podcast. Like and subscribe there. Ring the little bell to get notified when a new video goes live Monday through Saturday. Finally, you can go over to thatnerdysite.com and check out all the latest written reviews, content, and features over there, as well as, of course, the podcasts that go live. You can go find Trevor at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trev, anything that you want to plug?
If you're like Logan and just saw Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, you can catch this week's That Nerdy Site show, where Cameron and I kind of run down our spoiler cast on things. And if you haven't seen it yet, you can hear our spoiler-free review for like the first 10-15 minutes of the episode. So yeah, go check that out. This week's That Nerdy Site show.
Yeah, I encourage everyone to go do that. You can go find me at Lefty Logie or Lefty Loggy, Loggy. I will encourage everyone to go check that out. Go check out the Let's Plays we have going live Tuesday, Thursdays, and Fridays as well. Yeah, I think Cameron is still doing Friday Night Dying Light, and Trevor is switching it up every Tuesdays and Thursdays. It's always fun stuff happening over there, so go check all that out. Otherwise, you can go find That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site all across the internet. For myself, for Trevor, for all of us here at That Nerdy Site and That News Care About, play your games and be good to each other.